Good morning. Today we are gathering for the reintroduction of the Mandela Act, Assembly Bill 280. The Mandela Act will ensure that people are not held in solitary confinement for longer than 15 consecutive days, and that people who are especially vulnerable to its effects are never placed in isolation. This would include people who are pregnant, seriously disabled, and over 60 years of age. Solitary confinement truly is torture. The evidence shows, and the international consensus is, that solitary confinement does irreversible physical, mental, and emotional damage to people. California cannot reverse the damage already done by solitary confinement, but our state can prevent future harm. There are no studies that I'm aware of indicating that solitary confinement is a safe or that it makes a correctional environment safer. In fact, many people enter solitary confinement seemingly healthy, but leave broken by the extreme isolation and loneliness. Instead of counterproductive policies like solitary confinement, California should emphasize more educational, career training, and pro-social programming opportunities. Although Governor Newsom vetoed this bill last year, he also recognizes the deep need for reform. I'm encouraged that the governor has directed the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to develop regulations that will substantially restrict the use of solitary confinement in California. It is my hope that the legislature and governor can come together in an agreement on a policy that will treat all people in this state with the respect and dignity they deserve. Here with me today is Jack Morris and Kevin McCarthy, both solitary survivors, who will speak about their personal experience and the hardship they have endured in solitary confinement. Afterwards, Lisa Knox, the legal director of California Collaborative for Immigrant Justice, will speak, and I have several of my colleagues who will join as well. Jack and
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to Assemblymember Holden for being courageous enough to speak up for those that are in a position that even when they yell out are not heard. And to all the people that are representing this bill and backing this bill and putting work into trying to change a system that is inevitably and irreparably harming those that are incarcerated in solitary confinement. My name is Jack Morris. I spent more than 30 years in solitary confinement, more than 40 years, approximately 40 years in prison. I was released 5.5 years ago, and since then I have been working as a provider for reentry to the community. I have elevated in position, contributing to those that are formerly incarcerated when they re-enter into the community by providing services in order to help individuals reintegrate into a community that they should recognize is part of their community. I started as a community health worker, and I've recently been promoted to the program manager at St. John's Community Health in Los Angeles in South Central. My job is simple to explain. Those entering into the community, I provide anything and everything they need in order to establish themselves for a positive trajectory in their lives and assist them overcoming the 40,000 different barriers that have been identified to re-entering into the community after incarceration. In my position and in the capacity to which I work, my job has been both fulfilling and therapeutic. After spending decades in solitary confinement in a windowless concrete cell, talking only to my shadow and fighting insanity, I have been able now to contribute, pay taxes, to vote, and become part of a system that needs to address elements in that system in order to make our community as a whole a better place for everyone to live. Not only those that have not been impacted by the justice system, but those that are exiting the justice system and having to re-enter into the community and become recognized as members of California. I want to thank the courage of those representatives that we have elected to stand up for the people that seldom have a voice in order to protect them when everybody else has neglected or disregarded their existence. Thank you for having us here today. The Mandela bill is a bill that needs to be addressed and voted in, if only to serve those that cannot speak up as a result of concrete walls and steel bars being erected in front of them. Let's remove the veil of secrecy so that the community can know that the humanity of California is best viewed as a result of looking inside the prisons and how we treat those incarcerated. And thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Assemblymember Holden, Assemblymember Bryan. We appreciate the support. The California Department of Corrections would like the public to believe that solitary confinement is a safety need. But the fact of the matter is, solitary confinement brings the California Department of Corrections and prison guards over $20,000 more per year per inmate housed in solitary confinement than in the general population. Guards have admitted to me that they know solitary confinement is wrong, that they have problems and issues coming to work each day, seeing people warehoused in these concrete cages, but it all comes down to money. The state of California should not treat human beings as if they were marketable commodities. You know, we like to think of California as this, progressive state that sets the tone for the rest of the country. But we're failing in terms of solitary confinement. This issue should have been rectified years ago. I'm one of the people who Assemblymember Holden pointed out as being broken. I spent 2 years in solitary confinement as a juvenile. I was given one book to read per week, 5 pieces of paper, and a pencil. I'd often finish that book within a couple days. I was unable to speak to my neighbors. If I was caught speaking to one of my neighbors, my 1 hour out per day was taken away from me. The guards in solitary confinement, they didn't like to work. They didn't like to escort the kids to the cages for their 1 hour out a day or to the showers. So they would get extra food and they would auction it off. They would ask us, hey, are you willing to refuse your shower, refuse your 1 hour out for an extra tray? Or would you give 2 days? Would you give 3 days? And they would auction food off so they didn't have to work. And this is at a time when these kids should be receiving treatment, when they should be receiving healing, but yet they're forced to give up their 1 hour out a day, their basic hygiene, in the form of a shower, just to have enough food. What is that? How's that allowed to occur? It's awful. I recall, leaving out of youth prison, out of the California Youth Authority, and I just had so much resentment towards the law, towards authority figures. It was so difficult for me to live a normal life. I didn't know it at that time, but that had caused me PTSD. And the parole department didn't didn't screen for it. They didn't offer any type of treatment for what I had been through. They just left me broken. I would go on to spend 10 years in solitary confinement at the Pelican Bay SHU. During that time, I forgot what human touch felt like. My relationships with my loved ones were severed. The only time we were able to use the phone was when a loved one died. And if a loved one died, the gang investigators would wait for us and ask us if we wanted to debrief to go into protective custody. They'd prey upon our vulnerable condition. It was awful. It was a nightmare. But what I don't get is the 8th Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. A prison guard isn't allowed to go into somebody's cell and beat that person. But how are we allowing the California Department of Corrections to physically beat and torture, emotionally beat and psychologically torture human beings through solitary confinement? I mean, I would much rather receive a physical beating than be held in solitary confinement. Bruises heal, wounds heal, but the wounds in my psyche and my soul, those haven't healed. I have these reoccurring nightmares where I'm stuck. I'm stuck, or I'm drowning, or I'm paralyzed, and I know all that is because of those feelings of feeling stuck in solitary confinement. And I wake up screaming, and then I'm afraid to go back to sleep because I worry that I'm going to return to that same spot. And I'm tired of feeling stuck, and there's nothing that the Department of Corrections can do to heal me. But we have people who are still in there. We have future generations of children who we can either let go into solitary confinement and have them experience those feelings of being stuck. You know, we can torture them, or we can do the right thing, the thing that we should have done years ago, and end solitary confinement. I urge this legislature to pass this bill, and I urge Governor Gavin Newsom to do the right thing and sign this bill into law. Thank you.
Hi. Let me move this. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Knox. I'm the legal director for the California Collaborative for Immigrant Justice. And I'm honored to be here with you today, and thanks to Jack and Kevin for not just sharing their stories, but being part of this fight to end the torture that is prolonged solitary confinement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about solitary confinement and how it's used in immigration detention. My organization supports people in immigration detention who are fighting to expose unsafe and, during COVID, often deadly living conditions, who are fighting against their exploitation as workers who are paid $1 a day to perform essential labor in the detention facilities. And so what we've seen is when these individuals speak out, when they file complaints with the federal government, when they file lawsuits, or simply when they tell an official that they feel unsafe in a dormitory, they're often retaliated against with solitary confinement. And I'd like to give one example. In a detention center in the Central Valley, there are individuals who are on a labor strike. They've been on a strike for 6 months. They're refusing to work for $1 a day in facilities where they feel their working conditions are unsafe, and they're being exploited by being paid $1 a day, which is far, far under the state's minimum wage. And so one individual who wasn't even participating in the strike, but merely signed a letter in support of the strikers' demands, was put into solitary confinement for weeks. And we know that prolonged solitary confinement like this is torture. So this individual was faced with torture just for exercising his First Amendment rights. And sadly, I could tell you lots of stories like this one. And it's not just people who speak out, also individuals who request protection, people with LGBTQ people with mental health challenges who request protection in immigration detention are often put into solitary confinement. And sadly, an individual that I represented and knew well, Mr. Chung Woo-nan, who is a Korean elder in a detention center in the Central Valley, lost his life in solitary confinement in just such a situation in 2020. And again, he is not the only one, right? We talk about solitary survivors, but a lot of people don't make it out. So I'm here today to let you know that we need the community to support these folks inside immigration detention, to let them know that we're not alone. So I thank all of you for being here today, but we also need the state to take action, right? We need the state to pass the Mandela Act so that these individuals in immigration detention won't be subject to these abuses and this torture that is prolonged solitary confinement. And I'll end today with a statement from Sal Prasad, who is a formerly detained organizer who won his freedom just a few weeks ago, but unfortunately is still under some forms of electronic incarceration and so is unable to join us today. But Sal wanted me to share with you that solitary confinement does not keep anyone safe. He says, I know from personal experience that solitary confinement just compounds our trauma. It doesn't help anyone heal. It doesn't help anyone reintegrate into the community. So if California really wants to keep us all safe, if California really cares about public safety, it will pass the Mandela Act and make sure that no one else is subjected to the torture that I and others have experienced in immigration detention. So thank you to Assemblymember Holden for sponsoring this bill, and thank you to the other Assembly members who are here today supporting it.
Good afternoon. I'm Assemblymember Isaac Bryan from Los Angeles, and first and foremost, I want to thank my colleague, Assemblymember Chris Holden, not just for introducing this bill and for fighting for it, but refusing to let it die. And even deeper than that, I'd like to thank everybody who spent time in solitary confinement, who has come home and shown the courage of telling their story and their experience, because change happens when the people who are most impacted are sitting at that table. I went to Folsom this last year with a number of my colleagues here, and we toured, if you can call it a tour, the solitary confinement housing. And it's beyond heartbreaking. A lot of times we talk about the abuse of solitary confinement. I want to be very clear. The use of solitary confinement is an abuse, right? It is torture. You cannot have accountability and torture intermixed in that way. We're at a point in time where we're building out systems of care and opportunity and development and healing, while at the same time promoting one of the most harmful practices known to humankind. When I think about solitary confinement, I think about stories like Khalif Browder in New York. I think about Alfred Woodfox, 40 years in Angola, just passed away, but had time to write his story down and share his testimony with the world from his experience. This is a national problem. But one of the solutions, the beginning of the solution, can start right here in California. We took this bill to the governor's desk last year, and that was important. This year, we've got to get it signed and turn it into law. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Akilah Weber. I'm the Assembly member for the 79th Assembly District in San Diego, California. I want to begin by thanking Assemblymember Holden for bringing attention to this very important issue that we're facing. And I also want to thank those who spoke today to tell us their stories. It's not easy what they lived, and it's not easy telling people, because it's once again a reminder, recounting the horrific ordeals that they have been through. Last April, when I joined Assemblymember Holden on a tour of New Folsom Prison solitary confinement, I was shocked and extremely disappointed to see how we treat our fellow human beings. I remember asking one of the guards what was the minimum time that someone would be put in solitary confinement. And I thought he would say a day, 2 days. And he said, I'm not really sure, probably around 4 months. Imagine being locked in a room the size of a king bed for 23 hours a day for a minimum of 4 months. Neurologists have discovered that social isolation and sensory deprivation, those that are exposed to that when solitary confinement, can cause significant brain damage that is long-lasting. Studies have also linked solitary confinement to increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, and death. And I want to remind everyone that the purpose of jail is to remove individuals from our society that have made mistakes and to rehabilitate them so that they may return to society as productive members. The purpose of jail is to not dehumanize them to the point that they cannot and will not live outside the confinements of a cage. But unfortunately, this is exactly what solitary confinement does. The United Nations has recommended banning solitary confinement for longer than 15 days. And I applaud Assemblymember Holden for reintroducing this very important bill, which will the end of use of solitary confinement, especially for specific populations, including those with disabilities, pregnant people, and others, as well as setting limits on how it can be used. I'm proud to have co-authored last year's bill, AB 2632, and will proudly be a co-author of this bill as well. And we will continue to fight until it has passed both houses and the governor has finally signed this into law. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Assemblymember Ash Kalra from San Jose, and it's an honor to be here with Assemblymember Weber and Assemblymember Bryan, and a special thank you to Assemblymember Chris Holden for once again championing this righteous issue and for having me here today as a proud co-author of the Mandela Act. For years now, the international community and advocates have recognized that solitary confinement is one of the most severe and harmful practices in detention facilities today, going as far as labeling it inhumane and torture, which it is. In 2015, as mentioned by Dr. Weber, the United Nations ratified the Nelson Mandela rules, which prohibited any period of segregation beyond 15 days. And here we are 8 years later, still calling for much needed reform in progressive California. As a state, we have fought for more investments and opportunities for rehabilitation, as well as made great strides in criminal justice reform. However, all of that work is jeopardized if we are unable to address the inhumane treatment of people detained in jails, prisons, and private detention facilities. Numerous studies have shown that the ill impact solitary confinement can have on a person's rehabilitation, as well as their physical and mental health. As we once again debate reasonable policy already adopted by the international community, we must recognize that ultimately this is a fight for human rights. I worked as a public defender for 11 years, and during my time there, I would see how solitary confinement would be used, oftentimes under the guise of protecting individuals. I had members of the LGBTQ community that were put into solitary confinement for their protection, and it prevented them from doing any rehabilitation programs. So the idea behind making sure that people are safe cannot get in the way of the humanity of realizing we have the opportunity to uplift individuals. I had clients that would come back from prison that couldn't make it on the outside. Their trauma was too deep. And they ended their own lives because they could not get past the trauma that they had suffered from solitary confinement in the years that they spent in prison. When I had the chance, I know others have had the opportunity to visit Norway and Finland, and you see the prisons there, they deprive those that commit crimes and are convicted, they deprive them of their liberty. They don't deprive them of their dignity or their humanity. They don't strip that away from them. And yet here in California and throughout this nation, that's what we do. We don't only say we're going to remove you from your family, from your community. On top of that, there's the additional torture of being in prison itself. And then on top of that, we add solitary confinement to the mix. In California, our policies should be driven by our values: equality, compassion, and common humanity. And it is far past time we call out solitary confinement for what it is. It is torture. and we must put an end to this cruel practice. Thank you.
I want to thank my colleagues for being here today and being so clear and sober and passionate about this cause, and making sure that in California that we are going to do everything we can, and especially through this bill, to end solitary confinement as it is being used today. How can California, being the progressive state that we claim to be, fall behind Colorado, New York, New Jersey, and other states who have already moved down the road and recognizing this practice as torture? I want to thank those who are here as our sponsors, our survivors of solitary confinement, for telling their story and knowing that this is the beginning of this next journey. But we are going to do it. We're going to get there because it is righteous in terms of what we're standing for, and we believe that the governor will see that and join with us and make sure that we have a policy that works for California and moves us off of what we have deemed today and know to be torture and the solitary confinement as torture. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to you to continue to be with us as we move forward. And I appreciate all of those who stand behind me who have been fighting this cause for many, many years. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.